20 years ago, Mundus, the Emperor of the Underworld, resurrected.
Mundus?
Yes. His powers were sealed by Sparta. He's attempting to gain control of the human world once again. He has been preparing to open the gate on Malay Island.
With the release of Devil May Cry on Switch this week, Capcom's stylish action series finally makes its way to Nintendo platforms officially after numerous games over the past 18 years. But Devil May Cry's demonic fingerprints dot the history of Nintendo since it first came out on PlayStation 2 in 2001, through primarily indirect ways. Here's a mixture of notable nuggets from Devil May Cry's history, as well as how its director got to make his own spiritual successor years later that now has a home on Nintendo systems and in Smash Bros. Let's kick things off with Devil May Cry's Resident Evil origins. Hideki Kamiya, known best in Nintendo circles for his work on Viewtiful Joe, Okami, Bayonetta, and The Wonderful 101, was the director of Devil May Cry. Starting development in the late 90s, Devil May Cry was initially a potential follow-up to his previous work, Resident Evil 2. Devil May Cry was the earliest incarnation of Resident Evil 4, but over the course of the early development, Kamiya's decision to emphasize stylish kinetic action proved to be too far of a departure for the series. Resident Evil 4 would take the better part of half a decade to make its way out, as the game famously went through many iterations before the critically acclaimed 2005 debut. And hey, Resident Evil 4 is also available on Switch if you're curious. Backing up, the in-progress work of what would become Devil May Cry was informed by a lot of European Gothic architecture, which led to the development team, dubbed Team Little Devils, to cut out the Resident Evil references and base the story loosely around the classic poem The Divine Comedy. According to Kamiya, not a lot of that original Resident Evil 4 concept is all that baked into the final product, especially since so much of Devil May Cry took shape when they leaned in on Dante's maneuverability and acrobatics and took it into a mission-centric design. Kamiya's next project following Devil May Cry, much to his chagrin, was not the poorly received sequel, Devil May Cry 2, that was made without his input. Instead, he went to work on an initially GameCube exclusive game, Viewtiful Joe. The Nintendo release had some Devil May Cry references, but it wasn't until the PlayStation 2 port that the references got extremely overt. Dante straight up just appears as a playable character in the PS2 version, with more series characters popping up in the PSP version of the fighting game, Viewtiful Joe Red Hot Rumble. This wasn't quite the full rollout for Dante on Nintendo systems, as he primarily existed in the series as a Sony exclusive, but it was the closest Devil May Cry would get to a Nintendo console for quite a long time. Dante would pop up as a playable character on the Nintendo 3DS though. Project Cross Zone is still one of the weirdest game series, as it's a turn-based strategy game that stars a variety of characters from Sega, Namco, Capcom, and even Nintendo. Oh yeah, and it's developed by Xenoblade creators Monolith Soft. Project Cross Zone is just weird. Anyway, Dante is one of these characters that appears in Project Cross Zone, appearing by himself in the first 3DS game, and then showing up with his rival Virgil in the sequel. Arguably the most notable aspect of Devil May Cry for Nintendo fans is its impact on the series' Bayonetta. Aside from a supervisory role on Devil May Cry 3, Kamiya never really touched the series he helped create again after the first game. In the time he made Viewtiful Joe and Okami, Capcom released 3 other entries in the series, so when Kamiya left Capcom after Okami launched, he had the ability to finish what he started with the first Devil May Cry in 2001. Months after Devil May Cry 4 launched, Kamiya and his new team at Platinum Games announced the development of Bayonetta, a stylish action game that was essentially Kamiya making a new Devil May Cry. Instead of Dante, you had Bayonetta. Bayonetta first launched in 2009, and after Nintendo stepped up to help fund Bayonetta 2, came to Nintendo systems in 2014, alongside the launch of the sequel. Humorously, much like Devil May Cry, Kamiya only directed the first game in the series. However, he had much more involvement in Bayonetta 2 and presumably Bayonetta 3 than he did with future Devil May Crys. So as you potentially dive into Devil May Cry on Switch, consider its place in history from the Nintendo perspective. It's a prelude to a Super Smash Bros. Character, a Capcom original that eventually gave way to a stylish Sega action game that would wind up becoming a Nintendo project. If it weren't for Resident Evil 4's development being experimental and weird, and Kamiya's stab at it going in a more action-focused direction, then it's unlikely Bayonetta ever happens, and that it's even more unlikely that she winds up in Smash Bros. Although maybe in that world, Dante eventually makes his way into Super Smash Bros. Instead, he was in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, sort of. Anyway, that's a little bit of history on Devil May Cry on Switch. It is pretty much now available on the console for $19.99 US dollars and regional equivalent. Go check it out. We'll have a full review within the next week or so. It's, from my memories and my time playing the game, it's very, very hard, but it's a proto-Bayonetta. It's pretty neat. Anyway, here's our director, John, to tell you all about our Patreon. Thanks for watching. Bye.
This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.